There is an important branch of psychology called learning theory. Learning theory deals with how it is that we acquire behaviors, our human behaviors, how we acquire capacity to, how we learn language, how we acquire physical skills, acquire culture, all these things that we learn that we can then use to express our human personality. And the origins of this field, probably all of you know, started a little over 100 years ago when the Russian researcher Pavlov discovered that if he paired a bell with food, he could elicit a hunger response, salivation from a dog, even if the food was not present. After a while, the dog was conditioned, so just the hearing the bell would cause the salivary glands to start squirting out the saliva. That was called classical conditioning. 2-3 decades later, B.F. Skinner discovered a more important mechanism for learning. It was called operant conditioning, in which there is a pairing of rewards with certain behaviors. And if you do, this is, you get a dog and when you're training a dog, if the dog makes a move in the right direction, you give him a little reward. And the dog will, over time, you can refine that behavior more and more through the application of these rewards. That was operant conditioning. In the early 60s, just a couple years before I started taking some psychology courses in college, there was a third mechanism for learning, even more significant, that was brought forward by the Stanford researcher Albert Bandura, and it was called social learning. And in social learning theory, what Bandura demonstrated was that human beings don't require the pairing of a stimulus with a response or the giving of a reward to shape behavior. Much of their learning can be acquired simply by observing the behaviors of others. Mm-hmm. And he contended, in fact, that human beings are evolutionarily adapted to acquire behavior through observation of the behaviors of others. So this was yet a third primary way in which human beings learn. And it is a very significant way. We have minds, complex minds, that assimilate a lot of information from what we see in the actions of others that then gets processed in ways that come to influence how we act. There are several things that determine how well this functions. Two of the important ones are attention. You have to have reason that you're attending to the behavior of others. And a second is motivation. If there are behaviors that we observe that connect somehow with motivating factors that we carry for whatever reason, then we are more likely to exhibit those behaviors that have been modeled by others. At any rate, modeling is an important mechanism for the acquisition of behaviors. And it goes to the heart, bringing this a little bit to the practice of yoga and the tradition of yoga. It goes to the heart. It goes to the essence of what an acharya is. Acharya loosely is, the word acharya is loosely defined as being teacher or spiritual teacher. But the deeper significance of it is, the Sanskrit definition, classical definition is, acharanat. Do I remember this? Yata patayati yasa acharya. And it means that an Acharya is one who teaches through exemplary behavior. So an Acharya is only an Acharya so much as they are exhibiting exemplary behavior. And they should be held to that standard. And Acharyas themselves should hold themselves to that standard. How we express ourselves in the world around those that we associate with is a significant factor in their learning how to behave properly as human beings. By properly, I mean behave in ways that will allow them to bring forward the fullness of their humanity and eventually to attain to divinity. There was one great yogi who lived about a century and a half ago, roughly, Swami Vivekananda. On a couple of occasions I've talked about a little bit about his history. For those who've heard it, I want to repeat a bit of this again. He was a remarkable human being in almost all respects. Physically, he was robust. At one point, he went on a journey traveling by foot the length and breadth of India on a pilgrimage that lasted over 4 years. He could endure the hardships required of just traveling with virtually nothing by foot through all kinds of conditions. He ended this pilgrimage famously at the southern tip of India, Cape Cormorant, I believe it is called, and just offshore there are a few small islands, maybe a quarter mile off. And he dove into these rough seas, shark-infested waters, and swam a half mile out to one of these islands and drug himself up on it. His heart was so affected by seeing the condition of his fellow countrymen, and he prayed deeply to the Mother Kali to give him a vision as to how to uplift this suffering humanity. And famously, he had this realization that he was to go to the West with yoga. And he was the first to do this. He brought the deep spirituality, philosophy of South Asia, the yogic tradition, to the West for the first time. He was an extremely intelligent man. It was said he would go to the library and get a stack of philosophy books and just sit down with them with intense concentration and just turning the pages, just absorbing. And if you ask, what was it you read, he could recount back with great accuracy. So he had a brilliant mind. He was articulate, a powerful orator, almost incomparable. And he was deeply spiritual, very reverential. He was, despite his high status in the society that he came from, in the society of Calcutta, he met this simple yogi, Sri Ramakrishna, and saw in him, he had the humility to see in him greatness and to prostrate himself, surrender himself at the feet of his guru. So in so many respects, Vivekananda embodied the highest, most achievements of the human life. And as a result of his journey to the West, it had a powerful effect on many, a great many in India, in his homeland. Millions were inspired by this. And the first thing he did was he went to the World Parliament of Religions that was taking place at the Chicago World Fair. And he was put on a panel with the leaders of the various great religious traditions of the world. And he was asked to speak first, and he declined. He didn't feel that he was in his power to speak, perhaps. And he let others precede him. And one after another, these great leaders of the different religious traditions stood and gave their speeches. And they would start off addressing the other members of the panel, eminent so-and-so, and reverend so-and-so, and doctor of theology so-and-so, and respected bishop so-and-so. They would go down the line, and then they would say, and ladies and gentlemen. Vivekananda, he came at the very end. All these other eminent personalities that stood up and delivered their oratories, inspired by their different traditions, with this formality. At the very end came Vivekananda. He stood up and he looked out at the crowd of people and just absorbed their humanity and said simply, brothers and sisters. And the whole 7,000 people all stood up in an ovation. Brothers and sisters. They were so moved. So he had this power to stir people's spirits. And he spent several years in the United States. Many were attracted. Big audiences came. And the news of this went back to his home country. And the people there saw that, their ancient spirituality, this deep wisdom, was gaining respect from this materially advanced culture. And it moved them, it stirred them. And when he arrived back in India, he came into the port, Madras, it is now called Chennai. And then he took the train to Calcutta. Wherever he stopped, tens of thousands would come up to listen to him. Such was his impact. There'd be hundreds of millions of people were stirred by this, inspired by him. And one time he was asked himself, he said, what is it that inspires you? This man who had inspired so many, millions, hundreds of millions. What is it that inspires you? And he said, I'm inspired by the lives of the ordinary people. Mm-hmm. When he traveled as a wandering monk, going through village after village, seeing intimately the lives of the people of his country, he saw in many expressions of what he felt to be greatness in their hard work, in their sacrifice for their families. These are people who are crushed under the heel of British colonialism. For many, their scope to advance in life was strangled due to the caste system. The big landowners, the big factory owners exploited their labor. And yet, amidst all of that hardship, so many of them would sacrifice so much for their families. They would raise them to respect the saints of the past, the supreme entity, to acquire behaviors, refined behaviors that exhibited their humanity. And Vivekananda recognized that that was not something small. This requires a greatness of heart, a sacrificing spirit. And that's what inspired him. They did not have the advantages he had. They did not come into the life old souls like him. But yet, in their own way, what they achieved, he felt to be just as great. And it lifted him. And he honored that. When we are modeling exemplary behavior, whether in Acharya or non-Acharya, it matters not. The highest, I believe, the highest that we can model is behaviors that exhibit a sense of service, a sense of sacrifice, behaviors that do not just think for our well-being, but think more for the well-being of others. I have seen it nicely expressed at this retreat. I see in the kitchen those that come around and ask, can I take your dirty plate and clean it for you? That do these little tasks just to make it easier for all of us. There are so many big and small things that need to come together for us to experience the spiritual love that was present during the Akanda Kirtan. And that requires the people attuning themselves to what is it that others need? What is it that will enable us, the collective of us, to reach this experience? When one measures the greatness of human expression, there is the tendency to look at how many lives are affected. How big is the impact? And there are great beings, great saints who have had this kind of impact. But it is not the proper measure of greatness, of sacrifice. That can only be measured in relation to the sincerity of a person's heart and how much is the capacity that they have to give of themselves. There may be those whose actions seem very small in the eyes of others, but there is true greatness in them, because there is true sacrifice, and there is a deep extension of themselves for the sake of others. We do not see what may be the results of these actions. Sometimes very small actions, like giving up something of ourselves to see that the life of others benefit, may have long-range consequences. Neela was talking about her father and giving up selling his land so that all his daughters could have an education. And now you have this remarkable, gifted human being. And I think all of this maybe have seen some of this exhibited in one way or another in the lives that we've had or lives of those around us. So the small actions that created the upliftment of feeling in this retreat. There may be some who go home carrying that spirit of love, and they may touch others with it, and that may spread. We do not see it. More importantly, the only entity that is capable of measuring the sincerity of the human heart is the divine entity. That is the only entity that truly sees what may be the sincerity, the sacrifice within us. And it is that entity alone who is guiding our journey toward divinity, toward our fullest human expression. That is where it really matters. It is between us and our divine Creator. those rewards for the efforts we make to further life, to uplift life, they will come. They may be delayed, but they will surely come. But let us all, with the love that we've assimilated here, make good use of it, that others might be uplifted.